That sentence was never meant to be spoken again. The warning came too late. Ellie Parker had already said the words, and every candle in Russo Hall went dark at once. 1 second earlier, the grand ballroom had glittered beneath crystal chandeliers filled with donors, professors, and pale strangers dressed in black. The next, silence swallowed the room so completely that Ellie could hear her own heartbeat. She stood beside a glass display case, one hand still resting on the strap of her worn leather bag. Inside the case lay a narrow strip of silver no longer than 12 inches, covered in symbols the auction catalogue described as decorative marks from an unidentified medieval culture. Ellie had known that description was wrong the moment she saw it. The marks were not decoration. They had rhythm, repetition. They behaved like language. A scholar in a crimson jacket had spent 20 minutes explaining that no living expert could determine their meaning. He had pronounced the first line 3 times. Each attempt polished, confident, and completely incorrect. Ellie had not meant to interrupt. She had only whispered the proper sounds under her breath, the way her mother once recited strange nursery verses while washing dishes in their small Massachusetts kitchen. But the artifact had heard her. Not brightly, not warmly, a thin white light moved through the carved letters like frost tracing a window. Then a woman's voice emerged from the glass case, soft with age and grief. "Dominic, if you hear this, the one who betrayed me still sits among your council." Nobody moved. Ellie felt hundreds of eyes turn toward her. At the far end of the ballroom, a tall man rose from a black marble chair set above the crowd. She recognized him immediately. Dominic Russo. He had visited her public school 2 weeks earlier, wearing a charcoal suit and the patient expression of a wealthy donor pretending not to notice the broken ceiling tiles. He had listened while Ellie explained why children deserved books in their own languages. He had promised funding for the school library. She had thought he was a reserved businessman, perhaps a little too formal, perhaps strangely pale beneath the fluorescent classroom lights. Here, surrounded by people whose faces looked flawless and cold, he was something else entirely. Power settled around him without movement or sound. His skin was whiter than any human complexion, almost luminous against his dark hair. His grey eyes fixed on Ellie, and the room seemed to lose several degrees of warmth. "Play it again," he said. The scholar beside the case swallowed. "Your Majesty, the object has never responded before, Majesty." Ellie's fingers tightened around her bag. Dominic descended the raised platform slowly. The crowd parted before him. No one asked them to. No one dared remain in his path. He stopped 6 feet from Ellie, close enough for her to see that his eyes were not simply grey. "Silver moved inside them like light beneath," he asked. Ellie forced herself to breathe. I corrected the pronunciation. A murmur swept through the ballroom. The scholar in crimson stepped forward. "Impossible. The inscription belongs to no recognized linguistic family." Ellie looked at him, then back at the silver strip. "It uses an inverted stress pattern. The spaces are not breaks between words. They are instructions for breath." The scholar's expression hardened. "And how would a school teacher know that?" "Poor school teacher," his tone implied. "Human school teacher. Someone who had entered through the staff entrance with a borrowed invitation and shoes, polished carefully enough to hide their age." Ellie lifted her chin. "Because you keep treating it like a code." Dominic's gaze sharpened. "And it is not." "No." She looked at the glowing letters. "It is a memory." The white light flared again. Several guests stepped back. Dominic did not. For the first time, something broke through his controlled expression. Not anger, recognition, pain. Ellie had seen that look on children who heard a dead parent's voice in an old recording. It vanished almost immediately, sealed behind centuries of discipline. A silver-haired man near the council table raised one hand. She must be detained. No human could know the first tongue without instruction. Ellie turned toward the doors. They slammed shut before she took a step. Heavy locks clicked inside the walls. Around the ballroom, the elegant guests stood perfectly still, but their eyes were no longer pretending to be human. Some glowed amber, others crimson. Ellie's pulse struck hard against her ribs. Dominic continued watching her. "No one leaves Russo Hall," he said. His voice remained quiet, yet the chandeliers trembled above them. Then he looked toward the council seated beneath the royal crest. "Not until I know which one of you murdered my mother." Ellie had learned long ago that silence could be louder than shouting. She heard it in classrooms when a child was too embarrassed to admit that there was no food at home. She heard it during faculty meetings when another program was cut because the district had no money. Now she heard it inside Russo Hall. where more than 100 immortal faces watched her as if one ordinary sentence had shifted the foundations beneath their feet. Dominic raised one hand and the murmuring stopped. "Seal the artifact," he ordered. 2 attendants approached the glass case, but the white light beneath the silver strip brightened when they came near. They froze. Ellie noticed the pattern before anyone else did. The symbols were pulsing in groups of 4, pausing, then repeating. It was the same rhythm hidden inside the nursery verse her mother used to recite. 4 beats, 1 breath, 4 beats, a warning disguised as a song. "Do not touch it," Ellie said. The silver-haired councilman turned toward her with open contempt. "You are in no position to give commands. I am not commanding anyone," Ellie replied. "I am telling you that the inscription is unfinished." Dominic's silver eyes remained fixed on her. "Explain." Ellie pointed toward the lower edge of the artifact. "It means the speaker mark is not a period." The ballroom seemed to tighten around them. Dominic stepped closer to the case. "What kind of answer? I do not know yet." That was the truth, and Ellie refused to soften it. But if someone responds incorrectly, the message may close again. The scholar in crimson gave a humorless laugh. "Convenient," Ellie looked at him. "Truth usually sounds inconvenient to people who have invested their reputations in being wrong." A few guests drew quiet breaths. Dominic's expression barely changed, but something almost like approval touched his eyes. He ordered the East Gallery cleared and had Ellie escorted there while the council remained locked inside the ballroom. The gallery was nearly 50 feet long, lined with dark portraits and windows that overlooked miles of moonlit forest. Ellie stood near an unlit fireplace, trying to understand how her evening had transformed from a school fundraiser into an investigation among vampires. 2 weeks earlier, her greatest concern had been replacing 12 damaged reading workbooks before Monday. Her classroom ceiling leaked whenever it rained. Half the computers no longer started. She spent part of every paycheck on pencils, notebooks, and snacks for students who arrived hungry. Dominic Russo had appeared during 7th period language arts without an entourage. He had sat in the back while Ellie taught her students how words could preserve a culture even after powerful people tried to erase it. One boy had stumbled through a paragraph in English while 2 classmates whispered about his accent. Ellie had stopped the lesson. She had asked the boy to read the same sentence in Spanish first, then explained to the class that knowing 2 languages was evidence of intelligence, not weakness. Dominic had watched without speaking. After the bell, he had asked why she kept working at a school that could barely afford paper. Ellie had told him that children should not receive smaller futures because adults gave them smaller budgets. 3 days later, the principal announced that the Russo Foundation would replace the library. That promise was the only reason Ellie had accepted the invitation to tonight's private auction. She had believed the event would be filled with wealthy donors and antique books. She had not expected ancient voices. She had not expected glowing eyes. She had certainly not expected Dominic to be a king. The gallery doors opened behind her. Dominic entered alone. Without the ballroom around him, he seemed less like a ruler and more like a man carrying an old question that had become too heavy. "Your mother," he said. "You claimed she taught you those sounds." Ellie nodded. "She called them memory songs. What was her name?" "Margaret Parker." Dominic showed no recognition, but his gaze dropped to Ellie's worn bag. "You brought something with you." Ellie slowly removed the small cloth-bound notebook she carried everywhere. Its pages were filled with her mother's handwriting, phonetic marks, and verses that had never made sense. The moment the notebook entered the moonlight, a pale symbol appeared across its cover. Dominic went completely still. Ellie opened to the first nursery verse. Beneath it, hidden between faded lines, was a sentence she had never noticed before. She read the translation silently, then looked up at him. "This says the first voice was not buried," she whispered. It was divided. Dominic moved beside her, close enough to see the page, but careful not to touch it. Divided between whom? Ellie turned the page. 2 names had appeared in silver ink. One was Parker, the other was Russo. Dominic stared at the 2 names until the silver ink dimmed. For the first time since Ellie had entered Russo Hall, he looked uncertain, not weak, never weak, but caught between memory and dread. "The Parker name does not appear in any royal archive," he said. "Then your archives are incomplete," Ellie replied. Dominic lifted his eyes to hers. "My archives span 9 centuries. That does not make them honest." The words settled between them. Ellie expected anger. Instead, Dominic turned toward the nearest portrait, a woman in a dark blue gown with pulled over a closed book. Her face held the same sharp elegance as his, but her eyes were warmer. "My mother," he said. "Isabella Russo." Ellie looked from the portrait to the notebook. Was she the voice inside the artifact? Yes, his answer came without hesitation. She died 312 years ago. The gallery seemed colder after that. Moonlight crossed Dominic's face, making his skin appear almost white against his black hair. The council reported that human rebels entered the estate during a winter summit, he continued. They claimed my mother discovered them near the private archive. By the time I arrived, the chamber had been sealed, the intruders were gone, and every record connected to the summit had disappeared. Ellie studied the portrait. You believe the report. I believe the evidence placed before me. Those are not always the same thing. Dominic's jaw tightened. Ellie could hear the restraint in the silence that followed. He had worn authority so long that people probably mistook obedience for truth. Why did you invite me here? She asked. You had already visited my classroom. You already knew I studied language. I did not know about the notebook. That was not my question. Dominic looked back at her. The artifact was recovered 6 months ago from a private collection in Vermont. The scholars could not identify the script. I remembered your lesson about languages surviving through ordinary people, so I approved your school for tonight's educational grant program. You hoped I might notice something. I considered the possibility. Ellie almost laughed, but nothing about the moment felt light. You brought a public school teacher into a room full of vampires to test a theory. You were never supposed to see the artifact closely, and yet it was displayed at eye level. Dominic's expression shifted by a fraction. She had caught him. You planned this. I planned to observe whether you reacted, without telling me what kind of room I was entering. If I had told you, your reaction would not have been natural. Ellie closed the notebook. That is called deception where I come from. In my world it is called caution. Then your world has given caution too much power. The gallery doors opened before Dominic could answer. The scholar in crimson entered with 2 council attendants. Up close, he appeared younger than Ellie had first thought, perhaps in his early 40s, though the stillness in his face suggested something far older. His hair was silver at the temples. His eyes were a polished amber. Your Majesty, he said, bowing. The council requests the human be questioned formally. Dominic's voice turned cold. Her name is Ellie Parker. The scholar's gaze moved to the notebook. Cassian Vale, he introduced himself, though his tone made it sound like a title Ellie should recognize. Chief Historian of the Russo Court. Then you are responsible for the translation presented tonight, Ellie said. I supervised it. It was wrong. Cassian smiled without warmth. You heard one phrase and now believe yourself qualified to dismiss centuries of scholarship. Ellie opened notebook again. Your version treated the third symbol as a royal possessive, because it is one. No, it is a witness marker. Cassian's smile disappeared. Ellie pointed to the repeated mark beneath the Parker and Russo names. It does not mean possession. It means 2 parties heard the same vow. Dominic stepped closer. What vow? Ellie traced the faded line with one finger, careful not to touch the silver ink. The symbols rearranged slowly, responding to her breath. She read them aloud in English. The voice of day will preserve the words. The blood of night will preserve the promise. Neither may rule the truth alone. A low sound moved through the gallery as the ancient portraits began to glow around their frames. Cassian went still. Not surprised, afraid. Ellie saw it before he buried it. She turned toward him. You knew this language was shared between humans and vampires. That is absurd. No, Ellie said quietly. What is absurd is pretending you fail to understand it. Dominic's silver eyes narrowed. Cassian's composure returned, but too late. Ellie held up the notebook. You did not mistranslate the artifact, she said. You changed it. For one long second, nobody moved. The silver light around the portraits held steady, outlining every painted face in the gallery as if the dead themselves were waiting for an answer. Cassian Vale recovered first. That accusation is based on nothing more than a frightened teacher's guess. Ellie kept her eyes on him. I am not frightened. Her heart was beating fast, but fear and surrender were not the same thing, and it is not a guess. Dominic stepped between them, his pale face unreadable. Then prove it. Ellie looked at him. His voice was calm, but she understood the challenge beneath it. He wanted the truth. He also needed certainty strong enough to survive the council. Give me 3 texts, she said. One verified. One that has never been forgery. Cassian's amber eyes narrowed. You expect the Royal Archive to submit to a classroom exercise? No, Ellie replied. I expect a chief historian who believes his work is correct to welcome verification. Dominic turned toward one of the attendants. Prepare the West Archive. Cassian opened his mouth to object. Dominic did not raise his voice now. 10 minutes later, Ellie stood inside a circular chamber below the gallery. Shelves rose nearly 20 feet toward a painted ceiling. Thousands of books and sealed cases surrounded a black stone table. The room smelled of old paper, cedar, and winter air. 3 documents rested beneath separate panes of clear crystal. Dominic remained at the far end of the table. Cassian stood beside him. 4 council witnesses watched from the wall. No one spoke as an attendant removed the coverings. Ellie examined the first text. Its symbols were narrow and evenly spaced, written in dark blue ink on thin parchment, but the lines leaned slightly upward. The third was carved into a sheet of grey metal. She did not begin with translation. She studied repetition, shape, distance. Then she closed her eyes and listened to the sounds in her memory. Her mother's voice returned from years ago, gentle and patient. "Never chase the word, Ellie. Listen for where it wants you to breathe." Ellie opened her eyes. "The first document is genuine," she said. Cassian folded his hands. "Translate it." She followed the rhythm silently before speaking. "A promise made under open sky remains binding beneath stone." One witness glanced at Dominic. He nodded once. "Correct." Ellie moved to the second text. At first glance, it appeared older. The ink was faded, the parchment edges had darkened, but the spaces between the symbols were too regular. Someone had copied the shape without understanding the breath pattern. "This is the forgery." Cassian gave a faint smile. "And your evidence?" The writer placed pauses after every 6th mark, a common ceremonial structure. "Not in this language." Ellie pointed to the center line. "Ethan follows intention, not visual balance." These pauses were added by someone who wanted the document to look formal. She read the false translation written on the label. "The human houses surrender all claim to royal protection." Then she touched the crystal above the original symbols without making contact. "But that is not what this says." The room grew colder. "It says the human houses entrust their records to royal protection." One word had been reversed. Surrender had replaced entrust. Ownership had replaced guardianship. Dominic's eyes shifted toward Cassian. "Who authenticated this record?" "My predecessor," Cassian answered. 200 years ago. Using notation developed only 80 years ago," Ellie said. Cassian looked at her sharply. She indicated a small mark near the lower corner. "That symbol is a modern catalog sign. It was disguised as part of the text." Silence deepened. Dominic approached the third document. "And this one? It has never been opened," Cassian said. "No scholar has produced a coherent reading." Ellie studied the metal sheet. The symbols were arranged in circles, not lines. She watched them until the patterns looking like writing and began to feel like music. 4 beats, a pause, 3 beats, a longer breath. Her pulse slowly matched it. The grey metal warmed beneath the crystal. The carved circles shifted. Several witnesses stepped away from the wall. Ellie understood then. The text did not begin at the outer edge. It began in the empty center. She leaned closer and spoke carefully. "The crown does not belong to the strongest blood." A faint crack sounded through the room. Dominic looked upward. "Continue." Ellie took one measured breath. "It belongs to the one who keeps the promise when power demands betrayal." The silver crown resting on a velvet stand behind Dominic split along one narrow line. Nobody breathed. Cassian stared at it, his composure finally gone. Dominic turned toward Ellie, his eyes glowing like moonlight beneath ice. "No living person has ever read that inscription." Ellie looked past him to the fractured crown. "Then no living person was meant to discover what it says." From somewhere deep beneath the archive, stone moved against stone. A hidden mechanism had awakened. The floor trembled once. Then a woman's voice rose through the chamber, clearer than before. "Dominic," Isabella Russo whispered. "Do not trust the keeper of your history." Every face turned toward Cassian Vale. The name hung in the archive like a bell struck beneath water. Cassian Vale did not move. That was what made Ellie certain. An innocent man would have protested too quickly, too loudly, with confusion before control. Cassian only watched Dominic measuring the room, measuring the witnesses, measuring how much of his authority still remained. Dominic's face had become perfectly still. "Explain," he said. Cassian lowered his eyes toward the cracked crown. "A damaged relic has produced a fragment of recorded speech. Nothing more. It named you. It named the keeper of history." Cassian lifted his gaze again. "That title has belonged to dozens of scholars." Ellie looked toward the grey metal sheet. The symbols had not gone dark. They were shifting slowly beneath the crystal, rearranging themselves like thoughts searching for language. "It is not finished," she said. Cassian's attention snapped toward her. "Do not touch it." "I was not planning to." Ellie leaned closer, listening. The pattern had changed. The 4-beat rhythm was gone. In its place came 2 short pulses, then a pause long enough to feel deliberate. "It is waiting for Dominic." One of the council witnesses whispered, "The king cannot read Ethan." Ellie looked at Dominic. Not yet. Cassian stepped between them and the table. Your Majesty, this human has already destabilized the crown and activated mechanisms we do not understand. Allowing further experimentation would be reckless. Move, Dominic said. Cassian remained where he was for one breath too long. Then he stepped aside. Dominic approached the metal sheet. Up close, Ellie could see the tension in his hands. He had faced the entire court without hesitation, but one line in his mother's voice had reached somewhere power could not protect. What do I do? He asked. The question was quiet. It did not sound like a king speaking to a subject. It sounded like a son standing outside a locked room. Ellie studied the symbols again. Do not try to translate to do. Remember why you was listening. Dominic looked at her. That is not scholarship. Neither is this. Ellie pointed toward the center of the inscription. The language is responding to intention. Every scholar treated it like a puzzle to defeat. That is why it stayed silent. Languages do not judge intention. This one does. Ellie looked toward the first document, then the forged second, then the metal sheet. The genuine text opened when I tried to understand it. The forgery stayed dead because it was written to control meaning. Athen does not preserve words alone. It preserves the purpose behind them. Dominic turned back to the inscription. And if my purpose is wrong? For a moment, nobody spoke. Dominic placed one pale hand above the crystal without touching it. I want the truth, he said. Nothing happened. Cassian's mouth curved faintly. Ellie heard the problem. The sentence was correct, but the rhythm was not. Dominic had spoken like a ruler issuing a command. Again, she said. His eyes hardened. I said the words, you did. Ellie held his gaze, but you did not mean them without conditions. The witnesses shifted uneasily. No one spoke to Dominic Russo that way. Ellie continued before courage could leave her. You want the truth as long as it does not destroy what you believe about your family. The language can hear the difference. Dominic looked down at the silver fracture running through the crown. His reflection stared back at him in broken pieces. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, human almost. I want the truth even if it condemns my house. The symbols flared white. The crystal vanished into transparency. A soft sound filled the archive, not music, not speech, but a breath held for 3 centuries finally released. Isabella Russo's voice returned. My son, Cassian Vale, knows what was hidden. The chief historian stepped back. Dominic did not look at him yet. His eyes remained on the glowing, he whispered. Isabella's voice trembled through the chamber. The first treaty was not a surrender. Humans and vampires built the law together. The Parker line guarded the spoken memory. The Russo line guarded the blood promise. Vale changed the words so fear could rule in place of trust. Ellie felt the notebook in her bag grow warm. Cassian's calm finally broke. This is a fabrication. Then why are you afraid of it? Ellie asked. He turned toward her, and the amber light in his eyes sharpened. Because you do not understand what you are awakening. No, Dominic said. He faced Cassian at last. She understands more than every scholar in this room. The metal sheet released one final line. If the teacher returns, protect her. The law will demand her silence. Cassian raised his voice before the echo faded. Then the law must be obeyed. He turned toward the witnesses. By decree of the old court, any human capable of speaking the first tongue must be detained and judged before dawn. The archive doors locked behind them. Dominic stepped beside Ellie, placing himself between her and the council. His face was white as winter stone. His eyes burned silver. Then before dawn, he said, we will judge the law itself. Before dawn, Russo Hall became a courtroom. The council gathered beneath a ceiling painted with constellations that no longer existed, while Ellie stood alone inside a circle of white stone at the center of the chamber. Dominic remained on the raised platform, not seated on the throne, but standing beside it. The fractured crown rested on a black cushion before him. Cassian Vale faced the council table with the confidence of a man who believed tradition would protect him better than truth. The old law is clear, he said. Any human who speaks Athen without royal sanction must surrender every memory connected to the language. If removal is impossible, permanent confinement follows. Ellie kept her hands at her sides. May I see the law? Cassian glanced at her as if the request itself were an insult. You are here to answer questions. Then I need to know what I am accused of violating. Several council members exchanged looks. Dominic spoke from the platform. Give her the record. Cassian hesitated, then signaled to an attendant. A sealed book was placed on a narrow stand outside the white circle. Its leather cover was dark with age. and a silver clasp bore the crest of House Vale. Ellie noticed that immediately, not Russo Vale. The attendant opened the book to a marked page. The official English translation appeared on one side, Athen symbols filled the other. Ellie read the translation first. Human knowledge of the first tongue threatens the sovereign order and must be silenced before sunrise. It sounded absolute, ancient, convenient. She studied the original symbols. The first line matched the rhythm her mother had taught her. The second did not. Its pauses were too even, just like the forged treaty in the archive. This page was altered, Ellie said. Cassian did not blink. On what basis? The first 3 lines are older than the final 2. The writing style changes. Ink fades unevenly. Breathe does not. A quiet murmur moved through the chamber. Ellie pointed toward a small hook beneath the final symbol. That mark changes the speaker from witness to ruler. It did not exist in early Ethan. One councilwoman leaned forward. How can you know that? Because the authentic inscriptions never command truth, they preserve it. Ellie looked toward Dominic. May I read the original aloud? Cassian answered, before the king could. Absolutely not. Dominic's silver gaze settled on him. Why? The language has already damaged a royal relic. The language revealed damage that was already there, Ellie said. Cassian turned toward the council. This is precisely the danger. She interprets every response in a way that strengthens her position. Ellie met his stare. Silence followed. None of the scholars moved. Dominic descended from the platform. He stopped beside the stone circle, his pale face calm, his presence enough to quiet the chamber. Tell me how. Ellie studied the symbols again. The text reads the first line. The accused reads the second. Cassian's confidence shifted, barely, but Ellie saw it. Dominic saw it too. Who serves as witness? He asked. The keeper of the law. Every eye turned toward Cassian. He straightened. I will not participate in an unverified ritual. You introduced this record as binding law, Dominic said. Now you refuse to read it. Cassian's amber eyes hardened. Because the human may manipulate the response. Then stand farther away, Ellie replied. Do not look at me. Read only what is written. Dominic ordered the white circle opened. Ellie stepped toward the book. Cassian took his place on the opposite side of the stand. The chamber lights dimmed as the first symbols began to glow. Ellie heard the hidden rhythm, 3 beats, 1 breath, 2 beats, a longer pause. Cassian read first, his pronunciation nearly perfect. The keeper asks whether forbidden knowledge has entered an unbound mind. Ellie followed the second line. The witness answers that knowledge freely understood cannot be owned. The book shuddered. Silver light spread across the page, erasing the official English translation letter by letter. New words appeared beneath it. A human who remembers the first voice shall be protected until the truth is heard. The council erupted in whispers. Cassian stepped back. That is not the law. Ellie looked at the veil crest on the cover. No, it is the law your family replaced. Dominic moved beside her. Who authorized the alteration? Cassian said nothing. Ellie turned several pages and found a list of dates. The oldest entry accused the Parker family of stealing royal documents. The language was formal, but one grammatical ending belonged to a dialect created almost a century later. This accusation could not have been written when it claims, she said. It is a forgery. Cassian's voice sharpened. Your ancestor removed records from this court. Perhaps they removed them because your family was changing them. A councilman rose. The Parker line was condemned 300 years ago. Ellie faced him. Using evidence written after the condemnation, the logic struck the chamber harder than any shout. Dominic looked across the council, then at the fractured crown. This hearing is suspended. Cassian lifted his chin. You cannot suspend ancient law for one human. Dominic stepped into the white circle and stood beside Ellie. I am not suspending it for her. His silver eyes moved across every face in the chamber. I am suspending it because the law presented tonight is false. Cassian raised one hand and the doors sealed. Red symbols appeared across the walls. Then the council will decide without you. Dominic did not reach for the crown. He placed it on the table between them. If this throne depends on a lie, he said, then it has no king. The red symbols spread across the courtroom walls like a second set of eyes, opening in the dark. Ellie felt the air tighten around her. The doors remained sealed. The council members who had supported Cassian stood first, their chairs scraping against the black stone floor. Others stayed seated, uncertain whether they were witnessing a lawful challenge or the collapse of everything they had trusted. Dominic did not move toward the throne. He stood beside Ellie inside the white circle, his fractured crown resting on the table several feet away. Release the chamber, he told Cassian. Cassian's expression remained calm. The council has invoked emergency authority. Authority granted by which version of the law? Ellie asked. A few council members looked away. Cassian ignored her. Dominic Russo has abandoned the crown during an active threat to the court. Until order is restored, the council will assume control. Dominic's silver eyes sharpened. You mistake refusal for surrender. You place the crown on the table because a king who cannot question his own laws is only their prisoner. The words moved through the chamber with more force than a command. An older councilwoman rose slowly. Her dark green gown whispered across the floor. I will not recognize emergency authority until the original charter is examined. A younger councilman stood beside her, then another. The room divided almost evenly. Cassian watched them without surprise. He had expected resistance. He had prepared for it. The red symbols brightened and a low vibration passed through the walls. Ellie noticed the pattern immediately. The marks were not random wards. They repeated every 8 feet, connected by thin lines carved into the stone. This is not a courtroom seal, she said. Dominic turned slightly toward her. What is it? A translation barrier. Cassian's gaze flickered. Ellie walked to the edge of the white circle. The symbols are designed to prevent Athen from being spoken clearly inside this room. Then why were you able to read the law? A councilwoman asked. Because that text was already active, but anything new will be distorted. Ellie looked at Cassian. You locked the chamber before you knew what evidence we might find. I protected the court from uncontrolled magic. No, you protected your version of history. Cassian raised one hand. Enough. The white circle flared beneath Ellie's feet. Dominic stepped forward, but Ellie caught his sleeve. Do not break it. He looked down at her hand, then at her face. Why? Because that is what he wants. She pointed toward the red lines in the wall. The barrier is linked to the royal blood seal. If you force it open, the council can claim you used sovereign power against a lawful hearing. Dominic understood at once. Cassian had not trapped them physically. He had trapped Dominic politically. If the king broke the chamber, every witness could be told that he had attacked the court to protect a human. Then how do we leave? Ellie studied the symbols. They were written in the same altered structure as the forged records. Perfect spacing, repeated pauses, meaning forced into obedience. We do not break the barrier, she said. We correct it. Cassian's composure cracked for the first time. She cannot. Ellie looked toward the council members who had refused emergency authority. I need everyone who heard the original law to repeat one sentence. The older councilwoman stepped closer. Which sentence? Knowledge freely understood cannot be owned. Cassian struck the table with his palm. You will remain silent. No one obeyed. The older councilwoman spoke first. Freely understood cannot be owned. The younger councilman repeated it. Then a third voice joined, then a fourth. The sentence passed around the chamber. Uneven at first, then steadier. Human accents, ancient accents, voices shaped by different centuries. Ellie listened for the shared rhythm beneath them. 3 beats, 1 breath, 2 beats, a longer pause. The red symbols began to flicker. Cassian moved toward the wall controls, but Dominic stepped into his path. He simply stood there, pale and still, and Cassian stopped. Ellie raised her voice over the others. A law spoken by only one ruler becomes a command. A law repeated by witnesses becomes a promise. The white circle faded beneath her feet. The red marks on the walls changed color, from crimson to silver. One by one, the locks released. The courtroom doors opened. Outside waited dozens of guards, scholars, and attendants who had heard the voices through the stone. Their eyes moved from Dominic to Ellie, then to Cassian. Dominic stepped out first, but he did not take the crown. He held out his hand to Ellie, not as an order, as a choice. She accepted it and crossed the threshold beside him. Cassian followed, his expression cold. This proves nothing, he said. Ellie released Dominic's hand and looked back into the chamber. At the base of the wall where the false symbols had vanished, a smaller inscription now glowed in silver. She read it silently, then her breath stopped. What does it say? Dominic asked. Ellie turned toward him. The truth was not kept in the courtroom. She looked down the dark corridor beyond the council hall. It was hidden beneath a classroom. Before anyone could respond, a guard hurried from the east wing carrying a black metal badge. Your Majesty, he said, we found an intruder inside Miss Parker's room. He placed the badge on a cloth between them. The royal crest of House Russo gleamed across its surface. Every face turned toward Dominic. Ellie stared at the emblem, then at the king who had just risked his throne for her. For the first time that night, doubt entered her voice. Why was someone carrying your seal? Ellie did not accuse him, not yet. She had spent too many years teaching children the difference between evidence and assumption. Still, the black metal badge lay between them, and the royal crest reflected the corridor lights with uncomfortable clarity. Dominic looked at the guard. Where is the intruder supervision in the East receiving room, Your Majesty? He refused to identify himself. Was anything taken? Nothing we can confirm. Miss Parker's bag had been opened. Ellie's hand moved instantly toward the worn leather strap on her shoulder. The notebook was still inside. She felt its familiar weight, but that did not mean every page remained untouched. Dominic noticed. Check it. Ellie opened the bag and removed the cloth-bound notebook. The cover looked unchanged. The silver Parker and Russo symbols had faded, leaving only old fabric and softened corners. She turned through the pages slowly. Nursery verses, phonetic notes. Her mother's careful handwriting. Then she stopped. A folded envelope had been placed between two pages near the center. Ellie had never seen it before. The paper was yellowed, but the seal was fresh. A black crest marked the wax. Not Russo, Vale. Cassian's expression did not change. A convenient discovery, he said. Ellie looked at him. Convenient for whom? Dominic reached for the envelope, then stopped before touching it. It may be bound to her. Ellie understood. Ethan responded to intention and identity. The wrong hand could silence whatever had been left inside. She broke the seal herself. The envelope contained a single sheet covered in her mother's handwriting. Ellie recognized every curve, every narrow letter. Every way Margaret Parker crossed the letter T slightly too high. Her throat tightened. This is real, she whispered. Dominic's voice softened. What does it say? Ellie read silently first. Margaret had written that the Parker family had protected a map hidden inside children's lessons. She had discovered that House Vale was searching for it. She had moved Ellie repeatedly, changed schools, changed addresses, and taught her the memory songs without explaining their purpose. The final lines were darker, pressed into the paper with a shaking hand. If anything happens to me, do not trust the badge. The king's seal can be copied, but the old forge leaves a broken crescent beneath the crown. Ellie looked toward the black badge on the cloth. Turn it over. The guard obeyed. Beneath the royal crest was a tiny crescent, incomplete along one edge. Dominic's gaze shifted to Cassian. Who controls the old forge? The older councilwoman answered before Cassian could. House Vale. It has belonged to their historians since the first archive was established. Cassian lifted his chin. The forge has not been used in decades. Ellie folded her mother's letter carefully. Then someone preserved the method, or the letter was planted to suggest that. Cassian looked toward Dominic. You are allowing grief to replace judgment. Dominic did not answer immediately. He took the royal signet ring from his hand and placed it on the cloth beside the badge. The genuine crest was sharper, but that proved little until Ellie looked beneath it. No crescent, different metal texture, different edge pattern. The copy had been made from an older mold. Why would someone enter my room carrying a false Russo badge? Ellie asked. The guard hesitated. The intruder was near the desk where your school records had been placed. Ellie's fear changed shape. My students. Dominic turned to the guard. Secure every record connected to her school. No names leave this estate. Assign protection without approaching the children directly. Ellie looked at him sharply. You already had their records here. The Foundation processed the grant, and Cassian had access to the archive system. The realization passed through the corridor. Cassian's face remained composed, but his silence had become too precise. Dominic removed a second object from his coat, a heavy silver key engraved with the Russo crest. He held it out to Ellie. This opens the Royal Archive, the restricted library, and every sealed historical chamber in the estate. Cassian stepped forward. You cannot give that to her. Dominic's eyes never left Ellie. I can. Ellie did not take it immediately. Why? Because any order I give now can be interpreted as control. His voice was low enough that only those nearest could hear. You questioned whether the badge meant I had sent someone into your room. I will not demand your trust. I will give you the means to test it. Ellie looked at the key. Power rarely offered itself to examination. It usually demanded obedience first. She took it. The metal was cold, but not painfully so. Dominic stepped back, leaving the decision entirely with her. Ellie returned to her mother's letter. At the bottom, beneath the warning about the forge, a line of Ethan had appeared in pale silver. She followed the breath marks. The lesson sleeps where children once learned beneath the king. Dominic looked toward the western wing. There has never been a school inside Russo Hall. Cassian spoke too quickly. Because the line is symbolic. Ellie turned the notebook sideways. The nursery verses formed a map when the margins aligned. A narrow path led below the oldest foundation, more than 30 feet beneath the castle. At its center was a small drawing of a classroom door. Ellie looked at Dominic. Your archives did not forget the school. Her eyes moved to Cassian. Someone removed it from every record. The map in Ellie's notebook led them away from the council chamber and into the oldest section of Russo Hall, where the stone walls narrowed and the air carried the scent of dust and cold iron. Dominic walked beside her, silent and watchful, while two trusted guards followed several steps behind. Cassian was not permitted to join them. That decision had drawn protest from half the council, but Dominic had ended the argument with one sentence. A historian accused of changing history does not guide the search for truth. Ellie held the silver key in one hand and her mother's notebook in the other. The corrected sequence of events was clear now. No one had opened her bag. The intruder had searched the guest room prepared for her, where Foundation staff had placed school documents and a small overnight case. The false Russo badge had been found on him. When the guard brought the badge near Ellie's notebook, the broken crescent beneath the crest had activated a hidden seam in the cloth cover. Margaret Parker's letter had been there for years, protected between two layers of binding. House Vale had never touched it. The thought brought Ellie no comfort. It meant her mother had expected danger long before Ellie understood any of this. The passage ended at a blank stone wall beneath the western foundation. Dominic examined it. "There is no door." "There is," Ellie said. "It just was not designed to answer to sight." She opened the notebook to the nursery verses and aligned the margins. 4 simple songs became one pattern. The first letters formed directions, the breathing marks formed numbers. 7 steps left, 3 forward, 1 turned toward the north wall. Ellie followed the sequence until she stood before a narrow section of stone no wider than 4 feet. She raised the key, but there was no lock. "The map says the lesson begins with a question," she whispered. Dominic looked at the inscription hidden in the notebook's spine. "What question?" Ellie read the faded Athan slowly. "Who has the right to remember?" The wall answered with a soft pulse of silver light. Dominic's face changed. Not surprise, recognition. "My mother asked me that once," he said. "I was young. I told her kings remembered for everyone." "What did she say?" "She said that was how truth became property." Ellie placed her palm against the stone. "No one remembers for everyone." The wall opened, not with force, not with spectacle. The stone simply folded inward, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. They walked down more than 30 feet before the passage widened into a chamber. Ellie stopped at the bottom step. It was a classroom. Small wooden desks stood in 2 neat rows. Some were built for human children. Others were taller, with black stone inlays carved into the edges. Faded maps covered the walls. One showed early settlements shared by humans and vampires. Another marked schools, hospitals, farms and libraries that had existed before the first separation laws. Dominic moved through the room as if entering a memory he had never been allowed to possess. At the front stood a slate board. Across it, written in pale Ethan, were the words "Keepers of the First Voice." Beneath the title was a list of names. Parker appeared 3 times, Russo appeared twice. Isabella Russo was the final name. Dominic reached toward it but stopped before touching the board. Ellie looked around the room. This was not a secret archive. No, it was a school, which means the language was taught openly once. The 2 guards remained near the door, stunned into silence. Ellie moved between the desks. On one surface, a child had carved 2 initials beside a simple drawing of a sun and moon sharing the same sky. On another, an old exercise sheet remained beneath a layer of dust. The lesson asked students to translate promises in both directions, human to vampire and vampire to human, so neither side could control the meaning. Dominic found a sealed cabinet at the back wall. The silver key opened it. Inside rested dozens of student books, attendance records, and a narrow box containing the Royal Teaching Charter. Ellie unfolded it carefully. The signatures at the bottom included Margaret Parker's ancestor and Isabella Russo. A later note had been added in darker ink. The classroom was closed by order of the Keeper of History. All public references were to be removed. The signature beneath it read Cassian Vale. Ellie looked up. He did not inherit the cover-up. Dominic's expression turned cold. He began it. The date was 312 years old, the same year Isabella died, the same Cassian, the same hand. Before Ellie could speak, silver writing appeared across the slate board. The words formed slowly, as if awakened by the presence of both bloodlines. The final proof requires the keeper of words and the keeper of blood. One must speak freely. One must surrender power freely. Dominic read the last line twice. What power? The fractured crown, still in the courtroom above, answered from far away. A deep metallic note traveled through the stone. Ellie understood before he did. To open the final record, she said, "You have to stop being king." Dominic did not answer immediately. He stood beneath the faded names on the slate board, his face pale and unreadable, while the distant note of the fractured crown faded through the stone. Ellie watched him study the final instruction. For a man who had ruled for centuries, the sentence was not symbolic. It was a door with a price. "How long?" Dominic asked. Ellie examined the smaller marks beneath the inscription. 1 hour. The crown will hold your authority until the record closes. One of the guards stepped forward. "Your Majesty, without the royal bond, the castle wards will no longer recognize your command, and the council could remove you permanently," the other added. Dominic looked toward the rows of abandoned desks. "If I refuse, the truth remains buried." Ellie closed her mother's notebook. "You do not have to decide because anyone expects you to." His silver eyes met hers. "That is precisely why I must decide." They returned to the courtroom above. Dawn was still more than an hour away, but the eastern windows had begun to lose their darkness. The council waited in tense silence. Cassian stood beside the fractured crown, one hand resting near the cushion without touching it. Dominic crossed the chamber and lifted the crown. "The final archive requires the sovereign bond to be surrendered freely," he announced. "For 1 hour, I will hold no royal authority." The room erupted in protest. Cassian raised his voice above it. "This is reckless. No unverified inscription should dictate succession." Dominic looked at him. "You feared the classroom before you knew we had found it." Cassian fell silent. Dominic placed the crown into Ellie's hands. It was heavier than she expected, cold enough to numb her fingers. "The keeper of words must witness the surrender," he said. Ellie heard the Ethan rhythm hidden inside his statement. 3 beats, 1 breath, no command, only choice. "I witness it freely," she answered. The crown flashed white. Every silver line in the chamber went dark. Dominic staggered once, catching the edge of the table. Color touched his face for the first time, faint but unmistakably human. His eyes became gray without their inner light. His heartbeat sounded in the silence. Slow, real, vulnerable. The floor beneath the crown opened, revealing a circular mirror of black glass. Ellie set the crown beside it and placed her mother's notebook at the opposite edge. Words appeared across the surface. She read the first line, Dominic read the second. Their voices moved together, human memory and royal blood meeting in the same breath. The glass brightened. Isabella Russo appeared within it, not as a ghost but as a preserved memory. She stood in the hidden classroom beside Margaret Parker's ancestor. Behind them were children from both worlds. "Dominic," Isabella said, "the first treaty was built to prevent either people from owning the truth." The image shifted. Dominic's father appeared in the royal archive, speaking with Cassian. The old king knew House Vale had altered the treaty. He knew Cassian had closed the school and erased the Parker records, but he also believed exposure would divide the court and begin a war. He chose silence, Isabella continued. Not because he believed Cassian, but because he feared the cost of opposing him. Dominic lowered his eyes. Ellie saw the pain move across his face without the protection of immortal power. The memory changed again. Isabella confronted Cassian before the council summit. She carried the original charter and planned to reveal it publicly. Cassian replaced her evening medicine with a sleeping draught strong enough to keep her from waking. There was no struggle, no spectacle, only a quiet room, a sealed report, and a lie repeated for 312 years. "My death was hidden behind fear," Isabella said, "but fear does not become wisdom because a king obeys it." The final image showed Margaret Parker decades later, discovering the old map and copying it into nursery songs. House Vale followed her movements, forcing her to hide the notebook with Ellie. Her death, officially recorded as an accident, had been arranged to stop the map from returning to Russo Hall. Ellie pressed one hand against her mouth. Dominic stood beside her, powerless but steady. "I am sorry," he said, "not as a king." As the heir to a silence that had reached into both their lives, the glass revealed one final sentence. "The crown may return only to a ruler who names the failure of his house before witnesses." Then the chamber doors opened. Cassian entered with 6 council loyalists. His amber eyes moved to Dominic's human face, then to the crown resting beyond his reach. "1 hour without authority," Cassian said softly. "Your mother always believed truth would save this court." He lifted the fractured crown before anyone could stop him. The silver metal recognized royal power, but not the man who held it. It burned with crimson light instead. Cassian smiled anyway. She never understood that courts belong to whoever controls what people are allowed to remember. The doors sealed behind him. Across the windows, the first grey edge of dawn appeared. Cassian placed the crown above his head and turned toward the council. "Dominic Russo has surrendered the throne," he declared. "By emergency law, I claim it." Cassian's claim did not echo like law. It echoed like something rehearsed too many times in an empty room. The fractured crown hovered above his head, glowing crimson but refusing to settle against him. Around the courtroom, several council members stepped back. Others lowered their eyes, uncertain whether fear still required obedience now that the truth had spoken. Dominic stood beside the black glass record, one hand braced against the table. Without the royal bond, he looked more human than Ellie had ever seen him. His skin remained pale, but no silver light moved beneath it. No command entered the air when he spoke. "The crown has not accepted you," Cassian smiled. "Acceptance is a story rulers tell after power is already theirs." He turned toward the council. "Bring the human forward. The old coronation vow requires a speaker of Athen." Two guards loyal to House Vale approached Ellie, but stopped when Dominic stepped between them. He had no supernatural force left, only his body, only his choice. "You surrendered authority," Cassian said. "You cannot protect her." Dominic looked at Ellie instead of him. "That decision is not yours to make." Ellie understood. He was not ordering her to trust him. He was asking whether she still chose to stand beside him. She stepped forward on her own. "I will read the vow," she said. Dominic's eyes sharpened. Cassian looked pleased. "Wise at last." "Not for you," Ellie replied. "For the witnesses." The crown pulsed above Cassian. A circular seal appeared across the floor, formed from red symbols that stretched from the throne to the council table. Cassian moved into its center. "Read exactly what is written." Ellie opened her mother's notebook beside the black glass record. The coronation text appeared in silver. She saw the trap immediately. The official translation called it an oath of obedience. The breath marks said otherwise. One pause had been removed, only one. But in Athen, one pause could change a promise into a question. Ellie lifted her eyes toward Dominic. He saw the recognition in her face and gave the smallest nod. "Not permission, faith," she began. "Before blood, before title, before fear, let the one who claims the crown answer freely." The silver light around the text brightened. Cassian frowned. "That is not the approved wording. It is the original wording." Ellie continued before he could stop her. "Did you preserve the truth entrusted to your house?" Cassian's mouth opened. No sound came. The crown flashed. The red symbols beneath him turned white. Athen did not force obedience. It demanded alignment between intention and speech. For the first time, Cassian could not hide inside carefully chosen words. "No," he said. The council went still. Ellie read the next line. "Did you alter the first treaty so fear would replace trust?" Cassian's face tightened. "Yes." A murmur moved through the chamber. "Did you close the hidden school and erase the Parker records?" "Yes." The crown descended an inch, not toward his head, but toward the white seal beneath his feet. Cassian tried to step away. The circle held him in place without pain, without force, simply refusing to release a man who had entered it under false purpose. Ellie's voice remained steady. "Did you silence Isabella Russo because she intended to reveal what you had done?" Dominic closed his eyes. Cassian looked toward him, and something old and bitter entered his expression. "She would have broken the court. Answer the question." The symbols brightened. "Yes," Cassian whispered. Dominic opened his eyes again. They were human gray, but no less powerful for it. Ellie read the final line. "Did House Vale cause Margaret Parker's death to keep the map hidden?" Cassian resisted longer this time. The room seemed to hold one breath with him. Then the truth came. "Yes." Ellie's fingers tightened around the notebook, but her voice did not break. The confession traveled through the chamber, heard by every council member, every guard, every scholar standing beyond the open gallery doors. Cassian lifted his chin. "You think this changes anything? Truth without control creates chaos. Truth without courage creates silence." He raised one hand toward the crown, trying to command the seal. Nothing answered. The white circle recognized his intention and closed around his authority instead. At that moment, a small group entered from the western corridor. Children. 6 young vampire students from the Foundation tour, escorted by their teacher and the older councilwoman. Ellie recognized them from the school visit earlier that evening. One girl clutched a practice card Ellie had given her, marked with the Ethan sentence used in the classroom below. The child looked frightened, but she read anyway. "Knowledge freely understood cannot be owned." Another student repeated it. Then another. Their voices joined, imperfect but sincere. The white seal widened across the floor, carrying the sentence through the courtroom. Cassian's stolen claim collapsed. The crown fell gently onto the black cushion. The seal around him became a quiet prison of light. Outside the windows, dawn brightened from grey to pale gold. Dominic's 1 hour had not ended. He was still human, still unprotected, still standing in a chamber where the first sunlight was beginning to cross the floor. Ellie looked toward the crown, then toward the rising light. There was only one final line left in the record, and it appeared beneath her hand. The ruler may return when truth is given freely before dawn. Dominic took one step toward her, but the sunlight reached the edge of the white circle first. The first ray of sunlight touched the edge of the white seal, and the entire chamber inhaled as one. Dominic did not recoil, but the color drained from his face. Without the royal bond, Dawn did not recognize him as king. It recognized only what he was. Ellie looked from the crown to the final line glowing beneath her hand. The ruler may return when truth is given freely before dawn. Cassian laughed once from inside the circle of light. You are too late. The old rite requires blood freely given. That is how the crown accepts a sacrifice. Ellie's eyes moved to the official translation beside the Athen text. Blood freely given. The phrase had been copied into every modern record. For one terrible second, the entire court seemed to believe it. Dominic stepped toward her. Do not do anything that places you in danger. His voice carried no command now, only concern. The crown is not worth your life. Ellie barely heard him. She was studying the breath marks. The first symbol could mean blood, but only when followed by a closed pause. Here the pause was open. The final mark did not mean given from the body. It meant offered without force. She remembered the classroom below. Human children and vampire children translating promises so neither side could own the meaning. She remembered Isabella's warning. Fear does not become wisdom because a king obeys it. Cassian changed this line too, Ellie said. The sunlight moved another foot across the floor. Dominic's breathing became slower. The children near the gallery doors watched in silence. What does it really say? The older councilwoman asked. Ellie raised her voice so every witness could hear. Not blood freely given, truth freely given. Cassian's expression sharpened. That interpretation has never been accepted because your family made sure no one could read the original. Ellie turned toward Dominic. The crown does not need a sacrifice. It needs a confession. Dominic looked at the fractured silver crown resting on the cushion. Whose confession? Yours. The room became still. Ellie continued. The record said the crown may return only to a ruler who names the failure of his house before witnesses. Your mother preserved the truth, your father buried it. Cassian exploited that silence, but you inherited the throne built on all of it. Dominic's human grey eyes lowered. For centuries, he had commanded rooms with silence. Now silence offered him nowhere to hide. The sunlight reached his shoes. He remained standing. My house failed the first treaty, he said. The crown gave a faint silver pulse. Dominic faced the council. My father knew the history had been altered. He believed exposing it would divide the court, so he protected the lie. The silver light strengthened. When I inherited his throne, I accepted the records he left without questioning who had been erased from them. I called that order. It was fear. A murmur passed through the witnesses. Dominic looked toward Ellie, then toward the children holding their practice cards. The Russo crown preserved power when it should have preserved a promise. Humans were denied protection. The Parker family was condemned for guarding the truth. Isabella Russo died trying to correct what my house allowed. Margaret Parker died because that failure continued into another generation. Ellie felt tears press behind her eyes, but she did not look away. Dominic stepped fully into the morning light. I cannot undo what was done. I can only name it without excuse and refuse to build another law upon it. The fractured crown rose from the cushion. No hand lifted it. Silver light traveled through the crack, not hiding the break, but sealing it with a bright line that remained visible. The crown crossed the chamber and settled above Dominic's head. His royal bond returned in a quiet wave. The windows dimmed, not to block the dawn, but to soften it. Color returned to his eyes, silver beneath grey. Cassian's circle remained closed. The old historian stared at the crown. You think confession makes you worthy? Dominic looked at him. No, it makes me accountable. He turned to the council. Cassian Vale will not be punished in secret. There will be a public trial with the original records, his confession, the false badge, the teaching charter, and the memory archive examined by independent witnesses from both worlds. Cassian's authority disappeared from the walls. The remaining red symbols faded into stone. The children lowered their cards. The chamber was safe. Only then did Dominic turn back to Ellie. He removed the crown and placed it on the table, as if refusing to let rank stand between them. Then he knelt. Gasps moved through the court. Ellie stared down at him. "You do not have to do that. I know." His voice was quiet. "That is why it matters." He looked at the notebook in her hands. "You returned my mother's voice. You exposed the lie beneath my throne. And when fear demanded a sacrifice, you found the truth instead." Ellie held out her hand. Dominic took it and rose. His skin was cold again, but his grip was careful, equal. Outside the windows, the sun cleared the horizon. For the first time in 312 years, dawn entered Russo Hall without anyone being ordered into silence. The trial lasted 3 days, and for the first time in the history of Russo Hall, every door remained open. Human legal scholars sat beside vampire historians. Independent linguists examined the original treaty, the altered records, the false royal badge, Margaret Parker's hidden letter, and the teaching charter recovered beneath the castle. The black glass archive repeated Isabella Russo's preserved testimony before every witness. Cassian Vale's confession, spoken inside the Ethan seal, was verified by the council members who had heard it and by the children whose voices had completed the ancient protection phrase. No evidence depended on Dominic's authority alone. That mattered to Ellie. It mattered even more to Dominic. Cassian was stripped of rank, access, title, and political power. He was placed in a secure holding residence without magical privileges, where he would serve a sentence determined under the new public court system. The council members who had knowingly supported the forged laws were removed from office. Those who had acted without knowledge were required to testify, submit their records for review, and complete formal training in the restored history. Dominic refused every request to bury the scandal for the sake of stability. "Silence created this crisis," he told the court. "Silence will not be used to solve it." The first treaty was reinstated. The law threatening humans who understood Ethan was abolished. A new charter established shared oversight between human representatives and vampire houses, with no single family permitted to control historical records again. The hidden classroom beneath Russo Hall became the foundation of the First Voice Institute, a public school for language, history, and diplomacy. Ellie accepted the position of founding director only after Dominic agreed to 3 conditions. The institute would serve children from both worlds. Its funding would be audited publicly, and no student would ever be forced to swear loyalty to a crown. Dominic accepted all 3 without negotiation. Ellie did not leave her old school behind. The Russo Foundation repaired the leaking roof, replaced the broken computers, restored the library, and created a transportation program so students from underfunded districts could attend language workshops at the institute. Ellie continued teaching 2 mornings each week in her original classroom because she refused to let success become another word for disappearance. Her students were the first human children invited to study inside Russo Hall. They walked through the grand entrance, not the staff door. Margaret Parker's death was officially reinvestigated. The records confirmed that House Vale had arranged the event that had been falsely reported as an accident. Her name was cleared, and her work was recognized as the final link in the Parker line's long protection of the first voice. Isabella Russo's portrait was moved from the silent gallery to the entrance of the institute. Beneath it, a simple inscription was placed in both English and Ethan. She chose truth before power. Dominic ordered no statue for himself. Instead, he signed the new charter beneath the names of the students who had spoken in the courtroom. 1 year later, the forgotten classroom no longer smelled of dust. Morning light crossed polished desks. Human children sat beside young vampires, laughing over pronunciation exercises. Ellie stood at the slateboard, her brown hair loosely tied back, writing the first lesson of the day. Dominic sat in the last row wearing a dark suit without royal insignia. He had insisted on enrolling as a student again, Ellie said after he misplaced a breath between 2 symbols. A boy near the window tried not to laugh. Dominic looked at the sentence, then at Ellie. "I have spoken 6 languages across 4 centuries, and you are still pausing in the wrong place." The class laughed openly this time. Dominic smiled and tried again. The symbols on the board glowed silver, confirming the meaning. After the final bell, the children carried their books into the sunlit corridor. Ellie remained behind, closing the windows while Dominic returned the practice cards to their box. No guards waited inside the room. No council watched them. "There is something I need to ask," he said. Ellie turned. He did not kneel, he did not command. He simply stood before her, pale and careful, holding no crown. "Will you help me build a home where neither darkness nor daylight is asked to remain silent?" Ellie looked around the classroom that had once been erased from history. Then she placed her hand in his. "Yes, Their union took place months later beneath the open sky, witnessed by teachers, students, council members, and families from both worlds. No binding mark appeared, no ancient law decided for them, freely. The first children's edition of Ethan was published that same week. Ellie opened the first copy in her classroom and read the title aloud, the first language, spoken again. Dominic stood beside the window, his face pale in the gentle morning light. Ellie joined him at the edge between shadow and sun. Their hands met there. The truth had been heard. The dead had been honored. The law had been changed. The school doors were open. And no one would ever again be punished for understanding.